Good morning, everyone, and my name is Paul Wheelhouse. I'm the Net Zero uh, Transition Lead for South of Scotland Enterprise and focusing very much on energy transition today. I welcome you to this Scottish Business Week event and delighted to present to you. First of all, can I uh, thank you for the opportunity to address you today, but I'd like to give my apologies on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Martin Valenti, who unfortunately is unable to attend today's event because he's recovering from COVID. Those who know Martin will be glad to know he's recovering well, getting better, but it was just not possible for him to take part today. I should say at the outset that I will be taking questions towards the end, so please put your questions in the chat room and hopefully we can get through those at the end, and colleagues who are Nia and Aaron are looking after the chat room will flag them up to me. Now, those who have heard heard it before, but know that Martin is a fantastic speaker. He's a great communicator and motivational speaker. So it is a bit of a tough task, I have to say, to fill his shoes today and to replicate what he would have said. But we're going to try to give it a go. And I want to leave you today with a sense of the imperative for action and that we can turn the challenge of tackling the climate emergency and reaching net zero into economic opportunities, and to let you know of the support that is available. But first of all, if we can get my clicker to work. Whoops, gone too far. Apologies to Aaron. What do we mean by net zero? Net zero means the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we put into the atmosphere, and the amount we're able to take out will add up to zero in a sense. As you see there in the quote, there's a just transition to net zero of 2045 or sooner is the single greatest opportunity to reshape our economy, and that it delivers well-being and prosperity for our people. This is a reference to the National Strategy for Economic Transformation published by the Scottish Government, which will basically determine government policy over the next decade or so. And basically, those who have heard Martin before will know that he would very much want to focus on, while there's a significant challenge in tackling the climate emergency, which I'll come on to in a second, and reaching net zero itself will be difficult. In those difficulties arise great economic opportunities, and we want to let you know also that there is a great deal of support that's available to you to help you as a business to achieve this. So I think just want to turn briefly to the reasons as to why we'd act. There's clearly currently also an energy crisis, which I'll return to later, for businesses and the opportunity to decarbonise our energy supplies. It's not just a good thing to do from the point of view of tackling the impact on the environment, but also to ensure we certainly design out any vulnerabilities to price rises in fossil fuels that perhaps we've experienced this summer and into the winter. While government support to tackle the energy crisis is of course welcome, it's by no means certain that this can extend for long. So we never need to use this opportunity and this window in time, if you like, to help existing and new businesses to take very seriously that challenge and ensure the maximum possible action to diversify your energy supplies and to make sure that you're less vulnerable to price swings in the future. But I first want to talk about pace. Our planet and ecosystems are already facing really dangerous levels of warming. You can see in the chart here, hopefully, that this is demonstrating that since the pre-industrial period, sort of in the first half of the 19th century, we've seen initially relative stability in our climate, but then increasing trend as we entered the second industrial revolution towards rising temperatures, culminating in the latter half of the 20th century and into the early part of the 21st century, the hottest years on record having been achieved in that period. We are seeing increasing droughts, wildfires, flooding, crop damage, food shortages, rising sea levels with the risk of salt water damaging good fertile land at low heights, and also increasingly climate-driven refugee crisis around the world, economic losses, biodiversity losses, and indeed extinctions of species. So that's all very depressing news, of course, but it only serves to illustrate that not only do we have an overwhelming evidence base to tell us that we have limited period in which we can, and I'll use this metaphor deliberately, turn around the oil tanker and the momentum that's building in our climate before we reach a tipping point beyond which we really do not want to go. If we fail, we'll see increasing damaging impacts such as those listed on the left on our ecosystems that we all depend upon, and clearly an impact on plant species as well, and animals indeed. And it's simply beyond the point of debate that action must be taken quickly as possible to avoid potentially unstoppable impacts on our quality of life, the environment in which we trade and operate as businesses, and indeed the very future of our species itself. So the warning signs are already there. There are forest fires in Australia, such as the one that killed an estimated 5 billion animals just a couple of years ago. And indeed, the wildfires we're seeing in California regularly now, states like Washington, Oregon, and the western seaboard of the United States. Indeed, we've had wildfires, believe it or not, in places like the Western Isles in the month of February a couple of years ago. And given that Western Isles is one of the wettest places on Earth, that I find extraordinary. So we see ever diminishing ice caps in the North Pole. Everyone's familiar with that, I hope. Vast amounts of fresh water being dumped into our oceans by melting ice sheets. While no single weather event itself can be attributed to climate change per se, we saw last year with the impact of Storm Arwen that as we see our pattern of weather changing quite dramatically over time, we can be assured that there will be more such man-made climate change related events such as Storm Arwen. That is the pattern that we will see in the future. We're seeing more frequent storms, hurricane events in areas like the Gulf of Mexico, in the Southeast Asia, places like the Philippines, and of course, right now we're seeing extreme flooding in Pakistan unfolding before our very eyes. In the same year that we had severe droughts in Europe, rivers like the Loire Valley and the Loire Valley drying up, wine country in France, and indeed the Tweed back home here in Scotland had one of its lowest levels in recorded history. So we are seeing increasing volatility in our climate, and that's the primary reason why we must act and why there's much public action. Just for Aaron's benefit, my phone has died, so if you could click on to the next slide, please. I'd be grateful. Thank you. Time doesn't permit me to go into much more detail today, but I hope I can take it as given that we all see this as a bad thing, that climate change is happening, and it's something that's caused by mankind, and indeed there's an imperative to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees or less since the pre-industrial period. And there is hope, though, and we know, even though we know that if we go beyond 1.5 degrees, we greatly increase the risk of these tipping points being achieved, and increasing adaptation issues for society. We know that there is increasing action being taken. So let's talk about what action is actually happening. Both Scotland and the UK are amongst the most progressive places in the world in terms of taking decisive action and having legislative targets to tackle climate change and to reduce our own domestic emissions dramatically as part of the Paris Agreement, and that was achieved in 2015. You may have seen a lot of coverage of the Conference of Parties last year at Glasgow, and that was the most recent forum by which the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change discussed progress on tackling climate change. Significant steps were taken in Glasgow. There's a Glasgow Agreement which made some real breakthroughs in areas such as use of fossil fuels, but suffice to say we have not yet done enough, and we're moving into the new COP in 27 in Egypt later this year, which will take forward those discussions and hopefully make further progress. But the good news is there is a growing consensus about keeping temperature increases to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius from that pre-industrial age. And even though we've achieved 1.2 degrees already collectively in terms of impact on the climate, which is obviously increasingly worrying, and we have a diminishing amount of time to achieve the turnaround of that oil tanker before we break through 1.5 degrees. The good news is there's growing consensus, and Scotland has set a challenging target to deliver a 75% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions produced annually by 2030. And as I hope you know, now we've set a target to achieve net zero emissions by 2045. Sorry, Aaron, if you could flick on to the next slide, please. So you can see some of the progress that we recorded as at 2018. These are figures that were reduced in 2020. Much of that advance and progress in Scotland has been driven by improvements in the electricity sector, which I'll turn to in a second. But our targets and those of the UK government for equivalent target for 2050 is based on statutory advisors, Committee on Climate Change, their advice, which is evidence-based and what's technically possible for Scotland, other devolved nations and the UK to achieve in that timescale. And the Committee on Climate Change has been monitoring progress against statutory targets, and they are generally pleased with progress in the electricity sector, but be very critical in progress elsewhere in our economy, both at Scottish and UK levels. But it's not all doom and gloom. In Scotland, for example, we have dramatic progress on decarbonising our electricity. As we may, I hope, know, by 2020, we were able to meet just under 98% of Scotland's electricity demand from renewable electricity alone, which is hugely significant. And it helps to prove to other countries around the world that it is possible in a relatively short space of time to transition your electricity supply in this way and decarbonise. But the transformation in electricity is not enough to help us achieve our targets for 2030 and 2045. Indeed, electricity only accounts for 21% of all the energy we use as a society, and just 1/4 of all energy we consume in Scotland, and a third of carbon emissions relates to transport, and more than half the energy we consume in Scotland and a significant proportion of emissions relates to heating our homes and business premises. So on transport and heat, we have not nearly done enough, and we need to focus much more effort. So I'm going to focus on some of the Scottish initiatives that are clearly out there, which provide economic opportunities for new businesses and existing businesses. There are initiatives across the rest of the UK, and you'll see that, for example, the regulation is being brought in to eliminate use of fossil fuel vehicles by the 2030s, and that's something that applies across the whole of the UK. But in the area of heat, increasing legislative power sits with the Scottish Parliament, and certainly the Scottish Government is taking a lead in many aspects of decarbonising our heat supply. Indeed, the government has developed a heat and building strategy that will deliver total value of around about 33 billion of economic activity to deliver our premises to net zero standards by 2045, and some 17 billion of that is about to be spent in the next decade. So in practice, this will mean requiring decarbonisation of heat within 1 million homes, 50,000 business premises by 2030. And the overall heat buildings programme includes the provision of heat networks, which might require up to the equivalent of 650,000 homes in Scotland to be added to a heat network by 2030. For those who aren't familiar with these kind of numbers, these are hugely challenging targets to meet in practice, because the build out of retrofit of our homes and businesses and delivery heat networks will be at a rate that has never been achieved at any point in our history. And this is why we're developing in our region in the south of Scotland a net zero route map for the region, and also an energy transition plan. And these mirror efforts being taken with the climate change plan at Scotland level and the soon to be published energy strategy and just transition plan that the Scottish Government are developing. So in these challenges, there's great opportunities for business to be able to respond to the demands that are emerging, the new supply chain opportunities to invest in skills and provide opportunities for growth for businesses, for communities, and indeed for individuals and their families. And we'll probably see that the next decade fundamentally changes the nature of our economy, and in so doing, create many new business opportunities, new market opportunities, as referenced in NSET, and indeed to be a source of new production, new commodities such as hydrogen, developing an entirely new sector of our economy. The next decade will, we believe, be truly decisive, both in direction of our economic future, but also in the future of our planet. So in short, the objective is, to us anyway, that CCC would tell us to halve our consumption of energy, which is a pretty staggering thing to say, given we want to grow our economy as well. But these things are not mutually exclusive, and treble our renewable electricity supply to be able to decarbonise our whole economy in the timescale we have set out. The key is to transition our energy system and economy in a way that's just and fair in terms of the impact on the most vulnerable in our society and globally, and also helping our businesses in general, but specifically those in high carbon industries such as oil and gas, to transition to a future in a decarbonised economy where we don't produce any net zero emissions, net greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. There are already some really exciting opportunities emerging for the Scottish economy. For example, hydrogen, which I mentioned earlier, as a replacement energy resource for things like liquid fuels like petrol and diesel, heating oil, LPG, helping decarbonize energy intensive industrial processes, and as a means of storage of power between times when we can produce it and when we need it, and also an ability to transmit energy from one place to another without the use of grid. So there are several methods of production of hydrogen, but just two principal ones that we're largely focusing on at the moment, called blue hydrogen, which involves steam methane reformation of natural gas we get from the North Sea, combined with carbon capture and storage technologies to capture the CO2 that's produced from that process. Or alternatively, I'm likely to be the dominant form in the future, green hydrogen, produced through electrolysis of water, effectively using electricity to split water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. And this very much is an opportunity, I think, for Scotland, which is much greater than in some other countries around the world. So work undertaken for the Scottish Government in 2020, which is, I understand, currently being updated, suggests that up to 300,000 jobs and £25 billion per annum of value to the Scottish economy might be generated by 2045 in replacing hydrocarbons and with the hydrogen alternatives and fuels derived from hydrogen like e-methanol and ammonia, and exporting hydrogen and these products to nations less able to produce it, such as Germany, Netherlands and Belgium. This would be 3 times the size of our current oil and gas sector in Scotland at this moment in time. And unlike oil and gas, green hydrogen can be produced anywhere in the world where you have the ability to use electricity and water to electrolyse water and produce that hydrogen. So this offers a great opportunity for a region like the south of Scotland, and indeed Scotland as a whole, to replace imports of hydrocarbons from elsewhere with hydrogen produced locally and used locally, fundamentally changing the terms of trade that currently exist for our region. So there's new opportunities there for even likes of farms to produce their own hydrogen, produce their own fuel for their vehicles, through to larger scale production. The south of Scotland in 2020 produced the equivalent of 37.5 megawatt hours of renewable electricity per household, in comparison with just 11.9 for Scotland, which Scotland has a tremendous record, as we just talked about earlier. So in that same year, our region was producing 3 times as much renewable power as Scotland was per capita per household, and several times what was being produced at UK level. So our region is therefore a tremendously rich region for renewable energy supplies. If you could flick on, sorry, Aaron, to yeah. So and maybe one more slide. Apologies, I've missed one out. Thanks. South of Scotland is a tremendously rich region, and therefore for energy, and therefore there's a very valuable characteristic for producing green hydrogen in the future. In offshore wind, Scotland has the largest current programme of offshore wind development anywhere in the world, with ScotWind leasing round subsequent allocation of sites off Shetland, totalling some 28 gigawatts of projects that will be developed over the next decade, and an estimated supply chain value for the Scottish economy of 1 billion per gigawatt, or 28 billion over that period. So these are incredibly exciting opportunities for new supply chain opportunities, going well beyond those I've mentioned here as well. So just offshore wind and hydrogen are just but 2 of many, and heat transition as well. But other key aspects of this program is to help businesses themselves to decarbonize their activities, such as logistics, energy consumption, commuting patterns for your staff, examination of the carbon intensity of the production process or services that are provided, because all businesses will be doing this impacts not just on the business itself, but the entire value chain for the production of the service the business is involved with in producing. And increasingly, investors and corporate clients are already closely examining their corporate social responsibility performance and performance against environmental sustainability goals, looking at their emissions. And that means they're looking at not only their emissions and their impact, but looking at your impact on their performance. And equally, you will need to start to look at your suppliers' impact on your performance. So become the norm that carbon accounting and carbon footprinting will be as important as financial accounting perhaps is to us today. Companies will clearly need to look at establishing an environmental baseline in terms of carbon footprints, and plan their own pathway to decarbonize their business, and if possible, achievement of net zero. For some sectors, it's not yet possible to achieve net zero, even using the best available techniques. So there is growing market for carbon trading and for investment areas such as natural capital to offset emissions that cannot be yet mitigated. Natural capital itself, investment presents a tremendous opportunity for new businesses, to be created in areas such as peatland restoration, regenerative farming, seaweed, seagrass restoration, harvesting of these products for medicinal value and other products, as well as forestry and other forms of traditional forms of carbon sequestration. But there are also really exciting opportunities arising in the development of carbon capture technologies. And just one local company, Carbon Capture Scotland, based at Crockertford in Dumfries and Galloway, is leading the way on direct air capture of carbon dioxide, which offers great potential to support energy-intensive businesses such as distilleries, breweries, and other big emitters to remove CO2 emissions. And that's an interesting example because that company was traditionally producing dry ice for refrigeration. They have diversified into a new area using the same technologies they used to produce dry ice to reverse that process and capture carbon dioxide. Ultimately, progressive companies may choose to align themselves with standards such as being registered as a B Corp or a B Corporation to commit to the UN FCCC race to net zero, or other means of demonstrating their sustainability. I'm conscious of time running short, so I'll cut to the chase. With the development of circular economy, if you can flick on, sorry, to the next slide, please. And we recognise that it's really tough for businesses right now. This set of data that was taken before the energy price crisis, showing well many companies intended to make transition in various areas such as reducing their energy consumption and producing more renewable energy. They are facing challenges in terms of cost. We've had on top of that the energy price crisis, which has clearly hit people's liquidity and ability to match fund projects. But businesses don't have to struggle alone to achieve these ends. Enterprise agencies such as ourselves, colleagues in Highlands and Islands Enterprise, Scottish Enterprise, Business Gateway across Scotland, as well as Skills Development Scotland, the Business Energy Scotland Service and Zero Waste Scotland, our universities and colleges are all able to support you as businesses to achieve this transition and capitalise upon these opportunities. I appear to have a puppy going up the back of my, so apologies for that. SDI and UK colleagues at DIT can also help with export opportunities too. CivTech challenges and other ways in which we're addressing that. I'll maybe come on to that in the Q&A. But networking with peers is key. We're arranging meet the buyer events, brokerage events to bring supply and demand together. Please take those opportunities up. We are helping businesses to look at how they can do the actions in the medium and long term to improve their energy independence, reduce their exposure to price shocks in the gas and electricity markets, bearing in mind current fixed price deals are unlikely to be renewed on as favourable terms as they have been hitherto. So please search for the Find Business Support webpage on our own website, that of High or SE, for more advice and support. We're working with suppliers to help diversify their product range into new areas, such as company Cochrane Limited from Annan, who've taken their industrial boilers, their leading industrial boiler manufacturers, and they have a 60% share of the whisky market in Speyside, repurposing that to generate heat by using hydrogen. So there are plenty of examples I could go into if I had more time. But we're working, I want to just get across, we're working to help you and other businesses to decarbonize your operations and pick up the phone or email us to get that advice. There are many examples across Scotland, and there's great reasons to be optimistic about the future. Team Scotland is here to help you, both first to survive and then thrive. It's in all our hands to take the great challenges presented by the net zero transition and the opportunities that arise from that, and to use them as a launch pad for success. So while it might all seem very daunting, please do pick up the phone or make contact and let us help you succeed. I better end there just to allow time for questions. Apologies to Aaron and Neil for running a bit longer than I thought. Distractions of puppy in the background did not help. Thank you. And we'll just go to the chat room. Oh yes, certainly there's a question there about finding and signing up to events. Certainly if you look out for the websites, for example, in our case, South of Scotland Enterprise, but colleagues at Highlands and Islands Enterprise and indeed other Scottish Enterprise, and indeed trade bodies like the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association, Scottish Renewables, regularly putting forward events, networking events, but certainly our enterprise ones, we do work together to publicise them. And hydrogen brokerage events which have occurred will probably be repeated in the near future. There'll be others around carbon capture in our case, and looking at opportunities therein. So just go to the website, keep abreast of events in the event section in the South of Scotland Enterprise website and parallel websites, and we'll keep you posted on those. Sign up for newsletters as well. Each of the agencies has their newsletters, and it's another way of getting informed about events that are happening in your area. So another question from Guy Robertson. Paul, how critical will carbon accounting become for business in the next 5 to 10 years? It's a really good point. We're already seeing evidence, particularly in areas like food and drink, Gary, of businesses that are producers. Some in our area that are high-profile businesses, multiple supermarket clients, for example, that are coming under increasing pressure, if you like, to demonstrate their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. And probably haven't got time to go into detail of that, but suffice to say, setting out their carbon footprint and the impact they have in terms of carbon within the production of the produce they're sending to the supermarkets, because the supermarkets themselves are increasingly coming under pressure from their customers and from investors. And you're probably seeing both a divestment movement within the investment community, people pulling away from fossil fuels, but looking to be certain about where they're putting their money into other sectors that those sectors are doing everything they can to tackle the climate emergency. And so we are beginning to see suppliers having to demonstrate that. And it is an area of science, if you like, which is improving all the time in terms of carbon footprinting and modelling to help businesses understand the impact of their operations and flag up to them where they can bear down on those emissions. So quite often there's low-hanging fruit, and there are other areas that you might need technological advances to help you. But you certainly pick up the phone to your local enterprise partner, High SE, or ourselves, and we'll help guide you in the right direction as the tools that are available already. How do you see local generation heat networks developing in rural areas? It's a good point, Trevor. There are local heat and energy efficiency strategies being developed in each of the 32 local authorities across Scotland. And this is hugely significant, and it will have as detailed a map as we will have ever had of where heat demand is located and where there are sources to offtake heat from industrial processes, things like distilleries or chemical production sites, and use that heat productively in heating our homes and businesses. And so we are, at the end of 2023, there'll be a well-established network of heat and local heat and energy efficiency strategies, and that will give us the kind of quality data to be able to take that forward. It will be more challenging in rural areas because of the less likelihood of high density pockets of demand in terms of densely populated areas that we get in cities. But there are great opportunities, I think, for heat networks in areas. If you think about Speyside, how many distilleries that could produce heat for local communities across Speyside, but across the whole of Scotland, these kind of opportunities do exist, and there may be a need for different business models to make them viable at a local level, and there may be need for more government intervention, but I'm sure there will be good opportunities for heat networks in rural areas like ours as well. It was a good starting point for companies to establish their carbon footprint. That there are tools. If you go onto the Bayes website, there's a great starting point. There's a tool there. I will supply information to Aaron and Nia that can maybe send this out to everyone. So there's a link that we can put in. But there are some sector-specific carbon footprinting tools in areas like food and drink and agriculture, but there is an improving science all the time. Carbon credits, Thomas, that is an issue that through the EU ETS has historically been, there's a trading mechanism in place for trading carbon credits. That had, since Brexit, has transformed into there's a UK ETS which mirrors that of the EU. I don't have the figures to hand, so apologies for that, but it's certainly an area which is becoming a much more mature market in terms of trading. And there are also emerging areas where individual landowners or partners are able to offer up land, and it's by making sure the projects that come forward for perhaps natural capital investment, things like forestry, planting, are designed in such a way as they work in sympathy with the local environment. So there's a lot to be done there about maturing that market. That's an area that investors are increasingly looking at, and I think because not all sectors can move to net zero as quickly as others, it will be an area that will help those businesses to address their emissions. How do we calculate the footprint, and is that an balance sheet asset if you have carbon credits? That may be a question that's going to take too long to answer in the time I have 30 seconds left. So apologies for that, but we maybe Nia and Aaron, we can get some information to Thomas about that after this session. So apologies that I've run short on time on that. But we've got the last question if we're going to wrap up. Yeah, so apologies to Nia and Aaron if I've run over my deadline there, but hope that was helpful, and I appreciate it's not as comprehensive as Martin would like to have covered, but I hope it's helpful to give you a steer as to some of the imperative as why we need to act, what you can do to act, what we're doing as a society, how enterprise agencies can support you as businesses to transform your operations and hopefully help you successfully transition to a net zero future. Thank you very much.